Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to set up a CI/CD pipeline from scratch. First up, what is CI? CI stands for Continuous Integration. It's all about testing your code before you merge it to your main branch on the GitHub, Bitbucket, or wherever your repository lives. So imagine you are working on a new project locally. Before merging, you want to make sure nothing breaks, right? CI steps in here. It automatically runs your test cases and make sure everything works before the code gets merged. Now let's talk about the CD part. CD stands for the continuous deployment. Once your code is merged, CD takes over and automatically deploys to a cloud service like AWS, GCP, Azure, Vercel or Render. Basically, your changes go live without lifting a finger. For this particular video, we will take a simple Node.js endpoint and deploy it using Render. But remember, once you understand the concept, you can deploy anywhere. Now that you have already familiar with how the CI/CD pipeline works, here is the core idea. All those commands you usually run in the terminal, like for example test, build, deployment, you don't need to run them manually anymore. Just collect them and define them once in your pipeline configuration file. After that, the pipeline take care of everything automatically and consistently. Time to roll up your sleeves and build the pipeline step by step. Let's get started. Guys, for this particular video, I have already created a small project locally. It has single endpoint which simply returns the text hello CI/CD pipeline. This particular project runs on the local host 3000. I have also created a test folder over here which contains the app.test.js file where I have written a test case to verify the response of that particular endpoint. In the package.json file, I have added the jest and the super test module for testing and express for building the web service. Now comes to the important part, the CI/CD setup. Inside the root of the project, I have created a .github folder. Inside the .github, there is a workflow folder that contains two workflows, one for the continuous integration, one for the continuous deployment. In the continuous integration part, this particular workflow will be triggered when someone creates a pull request targeting the main branch. Once the PR is created, the workflow does the following steps. Set up the Ubuntu machine, check out the code from the repository, set up the Node.js environment, install the dependencies, and then run the test cases. If you think about it, these are the exact same steps you have to do manually when you clone someone else's project and test it locally. For the continuous deployment part, this particular workflow will be triggered when code is pushed to the main branch, usually after the PR is merged. In this case, the deployment step is very simple because I am using the render for hosting. All I need to do is to hit the deployment hook URL provided by the render and that's it. The service will be get deployed. Now imagine you are deploying to AWS or some another cloud platform. In that case, instead of a single step like render, you need to write all the terminal commands that you normally run during a manual deployment. These commands should be added to the deployment workflow file. If any of these steps need credentials like AWS access keys, you will store those in GitHub secrets and reference them in the workflow. So in short, CI workflow runs on the pull request, run the test cases. CD workflow run on push to main branch and deploys it to the render. Let's now push this particular project to the GitHub and see the pipeline in action. So first of all, I create a remote repository over my GitHub. So I name it as CI/CD, mark it as public, add a readme file, and now hit this particular button. After that, I go to my terminal. I run this command. So through this particular command, I can see that I have not initialized the Git in my repository, in my local repository. So I will do that. Now you can see that .git folder is present over here. After that, I will link my local repository to the GitHub repository. For that, I will execute this command. Now we will ensure that the branch is named as main. After that, I will move my changes to the staging area. Commit those changes. and push those changes to the remote repository. Now my changes have been pushed. So you can see my changes over this particular remote repository. If you go to the Actions tab, you can see the two workflows over here, run test workflow and deploy to render workflow. So these are the names of the workflow. So basically in the ci.yml file, I have named this particular workflow as run test, and for the cd.yml file, I name this workflow as deploy to render. So you basically seen these two workflows names over here. And because we are currently in our main branch and we have pushed the changes to the main branch, that's why only the deploy to render workflow have been triggered and run test workflow didn't trigger, because that particular workflow will be triggered when you raise the PR. And this particular workflow will be failed because we didn't specify the deployment hook URL. Now let's set up the render part over here and add this deployment hook URL so the deployment workflow will be run successfully. For this, I will go to the render application. I will go to my dashboard. I have already signed up over here. I will choose deploy a web service. I will try to add my repository. So I just copy the URL. Click git repository and connect. So the name is CI/CD, node, branch is main, npm install correct, and the start command is node index.js file correct. We will choose the free tier over here and we will deploy this web service. So once we hit this particular deploy service button, so now it will execute those commands. So first of all, it will build the application, install the Node.js and try to run this service over this remote virtual machine. So now you can see our server is live running on the port 10,000. So if you go to this particular URL, you can see the hello CI/CD pipeline over here. Now what we will do is we go to the settings, go to bottom, and we will make this auto deploy as no, because we want to deploy when our pipeline successfully run. So we save these changes and this is the deploy hook URL. So we copy this particular URL, go to our cd.yml file and add that URL over here. You can also try to store this URL over the GitHub secrets, but for the simplicity, I just add this particular URL over here. But the proper approach will be to store this URL over the GitHub secrets. Now let's deploy the changes again. If I check the status, so there was some changes over here. We have changed the cd.yml file. So we will add those changes, commit those changes, add the deploy hook URL and push those changes. Now if you go to the GitHub folder, go to the action tab, there is one more workflow triggered, the deploy to render workflow. So as you can see, this particular workflow has been run successfully. Now if you go to the render part, go to the event. So as you can see, the deployment started. So for this particular commit, add the deploy hook URL. So basically, when our deploy to render workflow triggered, it will execute the commands that is present in that workflow. And in those commands, we have hit the deployment hook URL, due to which our changes have been moved successfully to the cloud service. And as you can see, this deployment have been run successfully over here. Now let's test the continuous integration workflow also. So for that, we will create another branch instead of main. So I named that particular branch like new branch 1. I will try to add some changes over here. So let's say I add another endpoint, that is hello, and it will return only hello. After that, I will check the status. So there was some changes over the index.js file. Ignore those .idea workspace.xml changes because these are the changes of the IntelliJ. So just ignore that. Now we will add those changes, commit those changes, add a new endpoint, and we push those changes. Now we have raised a PR over here through this new branch one. So if you go to this pull request, you can see the compare and pull request button over here. Now let's create a PR. After you create a PR, you will see in the actions tab, run test workflow have been triggered. So in this particular workflow, you can see, like, first of all, it set up the job, check out the code, set up the Node.js, install the dependency, run test, and there were some commands for the post setup Node.js and then post checkout code. So now this workflow have been run successfully. So if you go to this particular PR, you will see the option merge pull request. And once you merge this particular pull request, your changes have been merged to the main branch and deploy to render workflow will be triggered. So if you go to this, so now this workflow also runs successfully. And if you go to the CI/CD events, so this another deployment have been started again. Now let's wait for this particular deployment to be finished so that we can test the changes. Now our changes are live. Let's test the changes. So this particular endpoint is running correctly. Now let's test the hello endpoint. So hello endpoint is also running fine. So that's how you set up a CI/CD pipeline for your project. I hope everything was clear and easy to understand. Make sure you try setting it up on your own because just watching the video won't help you much. Hands-on practice is the key. I will add the link to the GitHub repository in the description so that you can check out the code. And also, if you have any questions or doubt, feel free to drop a comment. I will happy to assist. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Alright then, see you in the next video.